We're back here on Football Fridays, Fox Sports 940. Will Althoff and Luis Diaz. We're here till 6 o'clock. And, of course, we've got some big news. We have Seth Levit, the co-host of the Fish Tank podcast with O.J. McDuffie. They do their live show Wednesday nights. He'll give you the details shortly. But obviously, big news today, Seth. Topical stuff. What is the worst Halloween candy?
The worst Halloween candy. Wow, that's a good one. They have those red ones that are wrapped in like red cellophane that somebody picked off the basement that was left over from the previous Christmas, and they're not hot, and they're not, you know what I'm talking about? They're like kind of, I don't even know if they're dollar store candy. I am a candy corn guy, and I know that is almost like pineapple on pizza polarizing, but I love candy corn.
I like candy corn, too. I think the worst is Raisinets. Anything with raisins covered in chocolate, I'm not a fan.
Now, I'm going to tell you, I used to hate raisins, and then I grew up, Will. I became an adult. Because now when I'm having a trail mix, I look forward to that sweet little, like, am I going to buy raisins? Like, am I going to buy some Sun-Maids? No. But when I'm in trail mix, I look forward to the raisin.
Brother, when people are out there giving you as much candy as you want, and it's Snickers and Twix and M&Ms and all the good stuff, and somebody puts some raisins in there, I say, no thank you.
It's definitely not top tier. I don't know if it's the worst, but it's not top tier. I agree with
No.
you.
All right, so let's get back to the real news. Obviously, general manager of the Dolphins, Chris Grier, got... They say it's a mutual parting of the ways. Obviously, Chris has had a long-standing relationship with his team. A lot of fans have been asking for this move for a long time. Seth, as a member of the fan base, how do you take this news?
Yeah. Well, probably differently than the majority of the fan base. And I'm going to be very transparent. Like when I worked for the organization, and we're talking 1996 to 03, 04, as a young guy, Chris was a young guy in the staff there, and so I know Chris personally. He really is a wonderful person, and you don't like to see people lose their jobs, but I also understand when the results in a business like the National Football League, when the results are not what they need to be, and certainly that has been the case here for far too long for the Miami Dolphins, that change ultimately is made, and I'm sure it was a tough decision for Stephen Ross to make because he also had a great relationship with Chris Grier. But they keep talking about who's buying the groceries, and it's been Chris. He's been the guy. And I will say this though, and fans are certainly rejoicing. I mean, Twitter, my God, kind of people are telling a lot about themselves here and the way they're reacting. But the way people are rejoicing, I don't think the next time the Dolphins hit the football field that Chris Grier being somewhere in a press box or somewhere in a suite or not being in that suite is going to impact what you see on the field. And that's the part that's missing to me. That's the part that I don't completely understand, and I'm not calling for anybody's job, but I do think that it's a little short-sighted to say that all of the problems that the Miami Dolphins have had were because of Chris Grier.
No, I do think the majority of the problems were on that guy who hired quite literally everybody underneath him. But I do agree with you in the sense of, this team isn't going to be putting up Falcons-like performances for the rest of the year because of this one move. Now, especially when you think of the coaching errors that took place yesterday. You decided to put Jalen Wright on the inactive list and elevate Taj Washington. I know Omar Kelly wanted to point it at that specific move, but I'm looking at Matthew Judon, who's also on the field, and he's been a healthy scratch before. And it's like there's so many other people that you could have put on the inactive list and kept Jalen Wright on. And, of course, hindsight being 2020, Ollie Gordon goes down. And to me, that was the biggest part because what worked so well last week, that could have probably worked well again this week had we had two healthy backs, was that strong, diverse running game we had. Ollie Gordon goes down, and now we're stuck with Devon Achane, and we don't have that power game that was so critical in the win last week. So when you look at that, that's a coaching decision. Chris Grier doesn't make the active-inactive list. That's McDaniel. We're getting a new GM. Ideally, it's someone that understands what it takes to win in December, January, and ideally one day in my lifetime, February, which is a physical team. What do you think Mike McDaniel's chances are? Because You asked me 3 weeks ago, I say he is out the door as soon as we get a strong-minded GM, but he's kind of flourished in these last 2 weeks, especially with that 6 offensive lineman set, the pass game that's off it, the run game that's created with that extra strength. McDaniel has changed his ways. And yesterday, as much as I want to blame Tua and I want to blame McDaniel, oh, he can't throw a Hail Mary. That's what everyone's talking about. Those two, although they were problems and had their bad moments, weren't the refs calling the bad plays, weren't the offensive linemen jumping off sides, weren't the Washington brothers giving the game away to the Ravens. Those two weren't the problem. So all that being said, there are mistakes, there are some highlights. What do you think Mike McDaniel's future might be with this team?
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, Adam Schefter.
Oh, sorry. Let me cut you off. What do you think it should be if you were in charge? I know he's going to stay. Schefter said, what do you think it should be?
I'm not a guy who likes to say fire this guy or fire that guy, but
we love it.
I'm going to push back at you a little bit here, Louis, because you're talking about the guy jumping off sides, not Mike McDaniel. If you consistently have pre-snap penalties, if you consistently have players that need to be redirected by the quarterback because they don't know where to be on game day, those operational things fall under the head coach. And certainly the head coach is also the offensive coordinator. I do think that Mike McDaniel called an incredible game against Atlanta. I thought he called a great first half. I didn't like the fourth down play, and it sounds like it wasn't just on him because I think his players let him down. But I thought he called a great first half. I mean, he was ready and prepared, in terms of his play calling, to compete against the Ravens, and by all stretch of the imagination, the Dolphins should have been up 2 scores in that game, and they weren't. And there were some physical errors, but there were also mental errors, and there were things that we consistently see. We heard last week that the reason everything was so great was because Frank Smith, after 3.5 years, Frank Smith finally was removed from the press box, and then he was down on the field level, and that helped with some of the substitution in the operation. Why are those things consistently a problem? That's not Chris Grier's fault. It's not Chris Grier's fault. That falls on the head coach's shoulders. So, and I think that there's consistently some things that you could put in that category. I always find it funny. Our buddy Chris Perkins talks about how Mike McDaniel has underperformed given the amount of talent that he's had. But we're going to also criticize the person who procures the talent. That never adds up to me. I don't get it. And this is not it was a mistake to let Chris Grier go. The record speaks for itself. Not having a playoff win under the entire time that he was in charge of building this football team speaks volumes, and ultimately someone has to answer for that, and that's what's happened here. But I do not know how you can absolve the head coach of that responsibility. And nobody is saying that Stephen Ross has, but at this point, only one change was made. Now, you could say that perhaps only one change was made because making a change here, a coaching decision change right in the middle of the season, isn't going to necessarily impact anything on the field either, and we're going to let this person finish out, and maybe we don't feel good about who the interim head coaches can be. I don't know. We don't know what's in Stephen Ross's head, but what we do know is that there were 2 people in charge of this organization over the last 4 years. One has been relieved of his duties. The other is going to show up to work today and still be in charge.
Seth Levit is the co-host of the Fish Tank podcast. You can hear their live program Wednesday nights. And you mentioned, Seth, those drives. They didn't come away with points on a couple of drives in the Baltimore red zone last night. They can't close. They can't close out games. They can't finish these drives. They can't make tackles. I don't necessarily see these things getting fixed with the GM change, as you mentioned. This is a lot of coaching. This is a lot on the players. Do some of these guys need to be made an example of to show some sort of urgency by the coaching staff?
That's a fair question, and we heard that after Cleveland, right? Mike McDaniel said everything's on the table. They're going to reevaluate who's playing where, and again, the only change we really saw was Frank Smith and an elevated Jalen Wright for 1 week. To bring back Lewis's point from earlier, I think that sometimes those types of decisions do need to be made, and I think you probably will see some after this past week. But the one that everybody pointed to, and Lewis knows this, you brought up the live show, between Twitter and our live show the last couple of weeks, I have been adamant that everyone who thinks that Tua should be benched has lost their damn minds. At least this season, right? You are not going to get more out of Quinn Ewers or Zach Wilson than you're getting out of Tua. He is by far and away the best quarterback in that room. He needs to be the starting quarterback of this team, but he also needs to perform better. Those two things are both true. So should certain people be made an example of? Yeah, probably. You can't keep jumping off sides. You can't go out on the field and not know where you are. Tanner Conner had to be redirected a couple of times. And Dulcich is out there catching passes, landing on his head, bouncing back up. I think that's a guy who probably has earned more playing time. If you can't get a guy on the ground, then somebody else needs to come in there and get him on the ground, although I think the defense has played a lot better the last few weeks. But they can't be on the field for 3 and outs, turnovers, and everything else, and ultimately they're going to get worn down.
Speaking of Tua, yeah, I agree. My group chats are like, "Yo, we got to see what we have in Wilson and Ewers."
No,
and I'm like,
don't.
I'm like, I agree. I'm like that. You don't, because everyone knows Tua, as bad as he's been, we're not hiding that he's regressed.
You can't put everything.
Still the best.
You can't put everything on him this season. There is blame across the board.
Exactly. And is
Without
he solving the problems of $50 million quarterback should be solving? No, he's not. But he's also not, he's not the biggest issue. However, yesterday he caught a lot of flack. I'm not talking about the sack on the Hail Mary. Every aggregator I saw was saying Tua's blaming the Miami fans after the game. I didn't see it as that.
Ridiculous.
I saw it as him straight up saying, yeah, there were so many Ravens fans. Like, he didn't say anything about, like, as much as I hate when he says, "Oh, you guys are sitting home eating chips," or he said another one this year, or just a couple of weeks ago. As much as I hate when he says that,
clickers, chips,
yes, I didn't see this one as a shot at the fans at all. I mean, granted, we didn't have a lot of fans. We were outnumbered. I had a couple of friends at the game that said, "Yeah, no, we are outnumbered by a lot." To me, that was not a shot at the fans, but it was, in my head, a catalyst for the move we saw this morning, because everyone had been saying we got to stop supporting until a change is made. A change was finally made. And Tua, in the highest paid employee of this team, in front of the world, said, yeah, no, our fans aren't coming out. And he didn't blame them. He just said the Ravens were overpowering us. Do you think that took any weight into the decision this morning?
No.
I put those two together.
I don't think that Stephen Ross heard Tua say that and said, well, we got to get rid of Grier. I just do not think that A plus B equals C there. I just don't. But I will say this. For all of the different criticisms, and we've seen the worst version of Tua this year, unfortunately.
Yeah.
2023, we saw the peak of what he could be. Last year, we dealt with the injuries. And then this year has just not been a great version of Tua. But where he's been at his worst is at the damn podium. I mean, that between what you brought it up, chips, clickers, people, players showing up late to player-led meetings, and even this, he was honest, I guess, if he felt. But Larry Borum, hold your water, man. You know the snap count. You're not jumping off sides because the fans are loud, and I'm sure they were. I wasn't in the stadium. I'm sure they were loud for an opposing team's fans, but there's no way they were louder than what you get on the road when you go into some of these hostile environments. Like and I wasn't there, but there's just no way. And even if they were, it's not an excuse for a professional football player who's especially not a rookie. You can't jump off sides in 4th and 1. And it seemed like by McDaniel's reaction, by everybody's reaction, it seemed like they had called the perfect play for the defensive look that they were given, and they lost the opportunity. And then, of course, it becomes amplified when you miss the field goal. And Riley Baxter has been great. He has been great since he's had to replace Sanders. But, this is what happens with bad football teams as things snowball. But going back to your question, I think it was a silly thing for Tua to say, and he's good for 1 or 2 of those every time he gets to the mic. I don't know why, but he is. I think it was a silly thing for him to say. I absolutely do not believe he was calling out the Miami Dolphins fans. In fact, I think that with the heat that he has taken over the last few weeks, with what he says at the mic, he is probably doing everything he can not to step in a pile of you-know-what, and somehow he did it anyway. Do I think that Stephen Ross was driving or being driven home at a car that was probably parked a lot closer than the one that was
parked so close? It was parked on the 50-yard line.
It was right there. As soon as he stepped out of the elevator, he was able to jump right onto it. And I think he was listening to, post-game radio and heard that and said, oh, man, I cannot believe that Tua just said this. Somebody called Grier and set up a meeting because this thing's over. I just don't believe that. Was he disappointed maybe at attendance? Was he disappointed at seeing fans boo their own team at the when the opening lineups and they're being introduced? Was he disappointed at seeing people filing out of the stadium? I'm sure all of that was disappointing, but there's nothing that's going to disappoint him more than seeing the team fall to 2-7 and being embarrassed on national television yet again.
Seth Levit, the co-host of the Fish Tank podcast, you mentioned national television. They've got 3 more standalone games scheduled, probably going to be 2 after that Bengals game on Sunday night, December 21st, gets flexed out of that Sunday night position.
Yeah, we're going to see some flexing, aren't we?
Yeah, but they still have a Monday night game. That's not going anywhere. They've got this game coming up in 2 weeks or a week and a half versus, or 2 weeks, I should say, versus the Commanders in Spain. So those are going to be standalone games. Do you think some of this has to do with being embarrassed on national television continuously and Stephen Ross saying enough of this?
I'm sure it all compounds, right? I mean, owners, if you're a billionaire, you are proud and you are successful and you've earned the right to be proud. And yeah, you do not want to be embarrassed. I mean, that's absolutely has to be a factor. And it seems every time, like, a billionaire who's from New York doesn't want to go to New York and have his team be embarrassed. He doesn't want to be on national television and have his team embarrassed. But it's got to be more than that. It's got to be somebody saying, look at the decisions that were made. Look at the things you talked me into. Look how much money we owe to. If I'm not happy with his performance and I owe another $90-something million and you guys talked me into that, which is what we have to imagine is the case. I mean, all of those things are probably compounding variables as to what led him to make this decision. And I also have to imagine, because we haven't seen another general manager, I don't think. Has there been another general manager in the league fired this season? So, the Dolphins are ahead of the game now in the interview process and everything else. And so if you knew you were going to make that change, why don't you get started in making that change? And then you also, trade deadline's coming up, and you kind of take control of that whole process when you make that decision. So I have to believe, and there's nobody whispering this into my ear, but I have to believe that those are the compounding factors as to why a decision was made. I don't think it was because Larry Borum jumped off sides when Ravens fans were cheering.
That sounds like somebody who works in public relations and communications. Seth Levit, co-host of the Fish Tank podcast.
There was a time.
Seth, I know that people can hear the podcast on the iHeartRadio app. Tell everybody about the live show and where they can check that out as well.
Yeah, we started this live show this year, and it's on our YouTube channel, the Fish Tank Podcast on YouTube, and we do it every Wednesday night at 7 p.m. Lewis has been nice enough to dive in with us in the chat there. We have a lot of fun. And it's a good opportunity for us to let our hair down a little bit. And it's not just our standard interview format that people have become accustomed to with the podcast. And so it's obviously always OJ and myself. Chris Perkins is a frequent guest. We had Travis Wingfield, who you guys know very well, this past Wednesday, and our buddy Savak, who's our producer and very well known to Miami Dolphins fans. And we just like to try to tell them, right, Lewis? We try to tell y'all. So that's we have a good time and talk about things. And it looks like we're going to have plenty to talk about this coming Wednesday.
Seth, always appreciate the time. Thanks for checking in. We could talk about this stuff all day. Unfortunately, we've run out of time, but we'll make sure to check in with the podcast and Wednesday nights live there on the Fish Tank on YouTube. Thank you, Seth.
Appreciate you guys having me back. Thank you. Take care.
I tried to tell y'all, Grier was the problem. I tried to tell y'all.
Thank you, Seth. Have a great weekend, man.
You too. Thanks, guys.